According to details that have emerged only recently, a covert Ukrainian deep penetration operation inside Russian-held rear areas exposed a major vulnerability in Moscow's battlefield security system and demonstrated how a single operative, moving undetected behind enemy lines, can generate effects greater than those of a conventional artillery strike. The mission began at a Russian checkpoint, where a patrol stopped a vehicle and challenged the driver. He answered with the correct password, produced documents that passed inspection, and even exchanged routine jokes about command bureaucracy. Guards reportedly relaxed, smiled, and waved the vehicle through. Less than half a minute later, the checkpoint had effectively lost combat capability, while the man behind the wheel was already relaying information that would help identify the next target. To everyone who saw him, he appeared to be one of their own. He spoke with flawless Russian pronunciation, understood military slang, knew the jokes, the procedures, and the daily passwords, and wore the correct uniform with the proper insignia. In the environment of rear area traffic, logistics movement, and routine complacency, that combination was enough to make him nearly invisible. What followed, according to the account, was not an isolated raid, but a highly disciplined example of asymmetric warfare in practice. The operative was part of a Ukrainian special mission built around deception, language fluency, cultural familiarity, and the ability to exploit gaps in Russian rear security. Operations involving disguise as the enemy are considered among the most difficult in special warfare because success depends not only on endurance and fieldcraft, but on intimate knowledge of the adversary's habits, psychology, chain of command, and reflexes under stress. In such missions, one mistake can mean immediate exposure, capture, or death. Ukrainian units are said to possess a rare advantage in this domain. Many operators speak Russian naturally, understand regional nuances, and can convincingly reproduce the bearing and casual behavior expected inside Russian formations. That advantage, according to this account, has been used systematically rather than exceptionally. The target area in this case was a rear logistics zone, where Russian forces were operating under conditions far removed from frontline vigilance. The area included ammunition storage, maintenance workshops, vehicle repair facilities, and transport movement points that supported combat operations farther forward. Because the site lay behind the immediate line of fire, routines had reportedly become more relaxed. Guards relied on passwords, documents, and recognizable patterns of behavior. Traffic moved with less scrutiny than would be expected near the front. That atmosphere of relative safety became, in this operation, the very weakness the Ukrainian side set out to exploit. On paper, the mission objective was straightforward: infiltrate the district, collect intelligence, identify and mark critical assets for future strikes, and withdraw before detection. In reality, the assignment was far more demanding. The operative was to move alone, without close support, without an extraction team on standby, and without any practical rescue option if compromised. Every hour behind enemy lines increased the chance of discovery, and according to the details now described, what began as a reconnaissance task evolved into something much larger once the operative reached the center of the logistics network. The infiltration itself took place at night through a stretch of front that Russian forces considered effectively impassable. That sector was covered by minefields, motion sensors, and regular patrol routes designed to make unauthorized crossing nearly impossible. Ukrainian intelligence, however, had identified a narrow corridor that opened temporarily during a patrol change. The window reportedly lasted just 18 minutes. Within that period, the operative had to cross almost a kilometer of exposed ground while avoiding mines, detection devices, and observation. The account says he completed the distance in 16 minutes, leaving himself only a 2-minute safety margin before the patrol pattern closed again. By dawn, he had reached the approach route to the rear logistics hub. The first real test came at daybreak, at a small checkpoint on the road into the complex. It consisted of 3 soldiers, a barrier arm, and a makeshift fortified position built from sandbags. There, the operation could have ended within seconds. Instead, the forged identity package prepared for the mission withstood inspection. The cover story was simple and practical. He was a driver delivering spare parts to a repair shop. The password of the day, reportedly obtained through a source within Russian lines of communication, matched what the guards expected. For a moment, however, one soldier appears to have hesitated. He looked at the driver longer than seemed normal and began asking additional questions. Something in the manner of the man at the wheel, perhaps a little too composed for an ordinary driver, appears to have drawn his attention. The operative, according to the account, understood that the worst possible reaction would be visible anxiety. Instead, he answered with a complaint framed as a joke about command never leaving even rear service drivers in peace. The soldier laughed, the tension dissolved, and the barrier was raised. Once inside, the operative spent the next 3 hours moving through the logistics area, recording what he saw and building a target picture in real time. A concealed camera disguised as an ordinary object captured the layout of depots, the number and types of vehicles present, unloading areas, repair activity, and the pattern of convoy movement. A hidden positioning device marked key coordinates. By that point, he had reportedly already gathered enough data to satisfy the primary mission requirement. Under standard procedure, withdrawal could have begun. But near the central storage facility, he saw something that changed the character of the mission completely. Workers were unloading containers that, according to the operative, bore markings he recognized immediately. These were not ordinary logistical munitions. The account describes them as components associated with systems that Russia had publicly denied using on Ukrainian territory. In that moment, the target was no longer merely a useful supply hub. It became a site with possible strategic, political, and evidentiary value. Simply passing coordinates for a later strike was no longer enough. Proof was needed. Photographs, serial numbers, packaging details, internal paperwork, anything that could establish what had been moved into the facility. Getting closer to the warehouse required a new cover story because a spare parts driver had no legitimate reason to loiter near a sensitive storage area. The operative improvised. He staged a breakdown near the entrance and asked for help. 2 soldiers assigned to the warehouse perimeter approached. While one examined the vehicle, the operative engaged the other in casual conversation and used the opportunity to photograph the surroundings. Serial numbers on containers, documents visible inside the guardroom, and a map marked with positions and routes all entered the camera frame. The mission, however, was becoming progressively more dangerous. At that point, a vehicle carrying an officer with a higher level of access drove up to the site. The officer immediately began asking who the driver was and why he was present near the warehouse. The documents were checked again, this time far more thoroughly. The officer reportedly made a call to verify the identity and assignment in the system. Those minutes, according to the account, felt endless. The response eventually came back in favor of the operative. The legend held because a source inside Russian communications had inserted false supporting data into the relevant records. The officer apologized for the delay and allowed the driver to proceed, but the encounter changed the risk calculation. The operative now knew that his presence had been noticed, his face had been observed carefully, and time for additional low-profile reconnaissance was running out. At that stage, he made a decision that shifted him from observer to active participant in the strike cycle. Instead of withdrawing, he found a concealed position and transmitted an encrypted report. The significance of the warehouse and its contents required immediate action before the cargo could be moved. 40 minutes later, the reply came: "Remain in place and adjust fire." In military terms, that order transformed the operative from a penetration scout into a forward observer operating from inside the future strike zone itself. It also meant that survival would depend on maintaining concealment until the attack arrived and escaping the area moments before impact. He selected a position on the roof of an abandoned building with a direct line of sight to the warehouse. The choice carried obvious danger. Once explosions began, anyone on elevated ground in the area would instantly become suspicious. Yet from that vantage point, he discovered something even more important than the warehouse itself. The storage building was not an isolated facility. It was connected to a larger underground complex through concealed access points and buried communications corridors. Vehicle patterns suggested the presence of hidden entrances and a broader support system beneath the visible structures. He transmitted fresh coordinates, sketches, and descriptions. The answer from command came back quickly. Confirmed the data, a larger strike package is being prepared. For the next 2 hours, the operative reportedly mapped the whole complex, marking every visible entry point, guard position, transit route, and likely underground connection. What had been shaping up as a single strike against one storage facility was now turning into an operation aimed at disabling a critical node in Russian logistics on that axis. The intelligence collected on-site altered the scale of the attack and, according to the account, multiplied its likely impact. But even as he continued reporting, the environment around him began to change. Movement within the complex intensified. Vehicles started departing one after another. The same containers he had photographed were being taken out and loaded onto transport. In other words, the target was beginning to evacuate. Someone, somewhere, had sensed that something was wrong. The reason remains uncertain. It may have been the unusual number of document checks. It may have been a later analysis of communications traffic that revealed an anomaly. It may simply have been coincidence and routine caution. Whatever the trigger, the result was the same. The most valuable materiel on the site was on the move, and the opportunity to destroy it was shrinking quickly. The operative sent an urgent update stating that evacuation was underway and that an immediate strike was required. Confirmation came back 5 minutes later, along with an order to leave the area. In theory, he had 8 minutes to get clear of the danger zone. On paper, that was considered sufficient. On the ground, it meant sprinting across an area where any Russian serviceman who saw him at the wrong moment might stop him. The choice was stark: risk being noticed during escape or remain and almost certainly be caught in the blast. According to the account, he cleared only a small part of the distance before the first missiles hit. He was about 400 meters from the perimeter when the strike reached the complex. The shockwave threw him off his feet, but did not incapacitate him. Fires erupted. Russian guards and personnel immediately focused on explosions, rescue efforts, and secondary detonations rather than on searching for intruders. That chaos became his cover. He kept moving, using smoke, confusion, and the collapse of normal command control to break contact with the area before a coordinated security response formed. The strike's effects, based on the later assessment described in the account, went far beyond the destruction of a single warehouse. The attack reportedly disabled not only the visible storage site, but a larger underground installation whose existence had not previously been fully understood. Losses in equipment and munitions were said to be significantly higher than initial estimates. Several pieces of specialized equipment were reportedly destroyed before they could be deployed. Just as important as the physical damage was the documentary evidence the operative had already collected before the missiles landed. Those images, serial numbers, and records were described as material later used in briefings for international partners and as grounds for further investigation and additional sanctions activity. The mission, however, was not over when the strike ended. More than 10 kilometers still separated the operative from the line of contact, and the Russian side quickly appears to have concluded that the precision of the strike was no accident. Someone had adjusted fire from inside the rear area. Search groups were dispatched, checkpoints received new instructions, and personnel reviewed records and images of everyone who had passed through the logistics district in previous days. The operative's face was reportedly among those reviewed. At that moment, his disguise had lost most of its value. He could no longer safely use roads, checkpoints, or the vehicle that had brought him in. For the next 18 hours, he moved on foot through terrain where search teams were active. He avoided settlements entirely, traveling through woods and open fields under cover of darkness. Water and food began to run out. Every stop increased the risk of being found. The return crossing of the front reportedly took place 46 hours after the operation began. By then, he was exhausted, dehydrated, and physically spent, but alive, and carrying intelligence that, according to the description of the mission, was worth more than an extended series of conventional bombardments. In the days that followed, the broader significance of the operation became clearer. The strike had removed a key logistical asset, disrupted underground infrastructure, and interfered with the movement of materiel tied to systems of unusual sensitivity. The intelligence package brought back by the operative added another layer of value. It not only improved target understanding on the battlefield, but also created a documentary record that could be shown to foreign governments and investigative bodies. In that sense, the mission achieved military, operational, and political effects at the same time. One operative, one penetration route, one improvised adaptation inside enemy territory, and a result difficult to reproduce by any other means. Military analysts have long argued that this is how asymmetric warfare works when it is executed at its highest level. Not by matching the opponent's system for system, but by identifying where a larger force is most complacent, most rigid, or most reliant on routine. That principle appears to run through every stage of this account. Russian forces, stretched across an immense front and vast rear areas, depend on procedures, passwords, hierarchy, and assumptions about who belongs where. Ukrainian special units, according to this narrative, exploit that dependence by inserting people who can look and sound exactly like those expected to be present. The weakness is not merely technical, it is human. A checkpoint guard cannot challenge every familiar accent forever. A rear area officer cannot verify every truck repeatedly without paralyzing his own logistics. A system built for mass war eventually begins trusting the appearance of normality. That is precisely what deep infiltration operations are designed to weaponize. The significance of the checkpoint encounter at the start of the mission lies not only in its drama, but in what it reveals about the broader contest between security and deception. The patrol did not fail because it was entirely negligent. It checked documents, it demanded the password, it asked questions. Yet the operative still passed because he controlled the one element the guards could not easily measure: authenticity of behavior. He knew how to complain like them, joke like them, and respond at the right tempo. In modern conflict, especially in areas saturated with uniforms, traffic, and bureaucracy, that sort of behavioral camouflage can be more decisive than firepower. Once it opens the door, a single person can gather targeting intelligence, redirect strike planning, and trigger losses that ripple across an entire sector. The larger pattern is also becoming harder for Russian command to ignore. If rear areas can be penetrated by operatives with convincing language skills, forged identities, and access to current passwords, then every node in the support network becomes a potential vulnerability. Checkpoints, depots, headquarters, maintenance sites, loading zones, and communications hubs. The practical consequence is not only physical insecurity, but psychological strain. Guards begin to distrust drivers, technicians, and even men in their own uniforms. More checks are ordered, traffic slows, command friction rises. Suspicion becomes a weapon in itself because a force that no longer trusts what it sees must spend time and energy proving the obvious over and over again. That is a cost imposed without firing a shot. At the same time, the account underscores why such missions remain extraordinarily dangerous and rare. They depend on painstaking intelligence preparation, on access to enemy communications, on forged documentation of very high quality, on language ability that survives scrutiny, and on individual discipline under extreme pressure. The operative in this case had to cross mined terrain within an 18-minute gap, survive multiple identity checks, improvise near a sensitive warehouse, collect evidence under direct observation, switch roles mid-mission from scout to strike corrector, escape a blast zone under a countdown, and evade a manhunt over many hours while exhausted and short of supplies. Any break in that chain would likely have ended the mission and possibly the operative's life. That is why successful examples are treated not merely as bold episodes, but as indicators of institutional capability. For Ukraine, according to the logic illustrated by this operation, such capability offers a way to offset the structural advantages of a larger opponent. Where Russia can rely on greater mass, larger stockpiles, and broader rear infrastructure, Ukraine seeks to identify the exact points where a concentrated act of intelligence and precision can impose disproportionate cost. A warehouse connected to a hidden complex, a convoy route feeding critical sectors, a maintenance yard supporting armor, a command post coordinating logistics. Each becomes more vulnerable if an insider can be simulated convincingly enough to get close. In that framework, one operative can indeed generate more operational effect than an artillery battery firing blindly, because the operative does not simply strike a target, he reveals which target matters most. The aftermath of the mission also appears to support another conclusion. Knowledge of the threat does not necessarily make it easy to stop. Even if Russian commanders understand that infiltration under disguise is possible, closing every gap may be beyond their capacity. The front is too long, the rear too extensive, the number of facilities too high, and the pool of personnel who can be fully trusted too limited. Tightening checks everywhere would slow logistics and burden an already strained system. Relaxing them, even slightly, creates openings. That dilemma is one reason operations of this kind may become more frequent rather than less. The more a defending system is stretched, the more costly true airtight security becomes. In the immediate tactical sense, the mission described here ended with a successful return to Ukrainian lines and a strike assessed as highly effective. In the broader strategic sense, it serves as a case study in how modern war is increasingly shaped not only by firepower and numbers, but by adaptation, deception, initiative, and the exploitation of routine. A single checkpoint conversation, a correctly delivered password, a joke at the right moment, a staged mechanical failure, A hidden camera and a rooftop transmission point together produced a sequence of consequences that reached far beyond one warehouse. They disrupted logistics, exposed concealed infrastructure, generated evidence with international relevance, and forced the opposing side into a security panic. That is why this account resonates beyond its immediate battlefield setting. It is not simply a story of one daring mission. It is a demonstration of a wider method. While one side attempts to defend everything at once across a massive war zone, the other looks for the narrow seam where preparation, timing, and disguise can produce an outsized result. In such a war, uncertainty itself becomes a battlefield effect. The next driver who arrives at a checkpoint may be exactly who he claims to be, or he may be someone else entirely, carrying the next strike in his pocket. For Russian troops in the rear, that uncertainty is now part of the threat environment. For Ukrainian planners, according to this newly revealed operation, it is also a tool. And that ultimately is the significance of the mission now coming to light. It shows how deep penetration operations function in practice, how one operative with the right preparation can alter the shape of a larger action, and why conventional notions of rear area safety are increasingly unreliable in this war. It shows, too, that the most damaging blow is not always delivered by the largest weapon, but sometimes by the person who manages to stand in the right place, unnoticed, long enough to turn hidden information into decisive force.